Let me tell you something strange about people who only feel alive when they have a challenge. We live in a world that tells us peace should be the goal, that rest is sacred, that contentment is the ultimate achievement. Maybe you're one of them. And maybe nobody ever explained why stillness feels like dying, why comfort makes your skin crawl, why the moment you reach the summit, you're already scanning the horizon for the next mountain. If you want to understand what you feel without labels, and have language to explain yourself without justifying who you are, subscribe. Here we translate psychology into relief, not diagnosis. The world calls this restlessness, anxiety, an inability to be satisfied. But what if it's the opposite? What if needing challenge isn't a flaw in your wiring, but a sophisticated form of self-knowledge? What if it's your soul's way of staying sharp, of refusing to become background noise in your own life? These people possess something the comfort seekers never develop: metabolic aliveness, the capacity to convert pressure into presence, the refusal to mistake peace for paralysis. It's not that they can't rest. It's that they've learned something most people spend their whole lives avoiding, that growth and comfort cannot coexist, and they've chosen which one tastes like truth. We live in a culture that prizes the opposite, where self-care became synonymous with avoidance, where boundaries became walls, where rest became a permanent state rather than a rhythm. The narrative says you should want the quiet life, the predictable days, the absence of friction. But maybe the real friction is this: having to pretend that flatness feels like freedom, having to smile through another conversation about work-life balance when your life only makes sense when there's something worth balancing against. The pressure isn't coming from the challenge. It's coming from a world that keeps insisting you're broken for wanting one. Psychologists call this sensation-seeking paired with high internal locus of control. It's the need for stimulation combined with the belief that you are the architect of your own experience. In simpler terms, it's choosing your hard instead of having hardness chosen for you. Some people wait for life to happen. Others understand that aliveness is something you generate, not receive. It's the difference between being a passenger and being the engine. And engines don't run on stillness. They run on combustion, on the friction between what is and what could be. It's not chaos they're chasing, it's agency. It's the proof that they're still here, still capable, still unfinished. But of course, it doesn't always come from strength. Sometimes it's avoidance wearing the mask of ambition. Sometimes it's the fear of what you might find in the silence, the terror of discovering that without the noise of achievement you're not sure who's there. Sometimes the next challenge is just a way to outrun the last version of yourself before she asks questions you can't answer. And that's okay, because even fear is a form of motion. Even defense is a type of aliveness. The difference between running toward and running from can be razor thin, and sometimes you don't know which one you're doing until you stop. And maybe that's why you never stop. Chasing challenge isn't escapism. It's confrontation. It's the refusal to numb. It's saying, I would rather feel too much than risk feeling nothing at all. The person who needs difficulty isn't avoiding life. They're insisting on tasting it at full concentration, undiluted, unsweetened. Comfort doesn't feel safe to them. It feels like anesthesia, like watching your own life through glass. Needing a challenge isn't the same as being unsatisfied. It's being unwilling to mistake comfort for completion. It's understanding that you were built for weather, not for shelter. That your nervous system was calibrated for peaks and valleys, not flatlands. One person tried the gentle path. She followed the advice, scaled back, prioritized balance, created routines that looked like wellness from the outside, and she felt herself disappearing, not dramatically, quietly, like a photograph left in sunlight. When she finally returned to challenge, not as punishment, but as homecoming, she realized something. Her peace wasn't in the absence of pressure. It was in the presence of purpose that demanded everything she had. Studies show that people with high challenge-seeking tendencies report greater life satisfaction despite higher stress markers. But the most beautiful part isn't the data. It's when someone stops apologizing for their intensity and starts treating it like the compass it always was. It's not about never resting. It's about knowing that your rest only feels like rest when you've earned it through expenditure. You can say, I need challenge the way other people need quiet. I'm not running from peace, I'm just calibrated differently. This is self-knowledge, not self-destruction. You're not broken for needing friction. You're just honest about what makes you feel real. The world will call it intensity. You can call it integrity. The refusal to perform contentment you don't feel. The courage to admit that your aliveness has conditions, and one of them is resistance. Something to push against. Something that pushes back. Vou continuar com os últimos 5 capítulos. There's a difference between needing challenge and needing chaos, though the world conflates them constantly. Chaos is randomness. Challenge is chosen difficulty. One scatters you. The other focuses you into a single point of light so bright you can finally see yourself clearly. People who need challenge aren't adrenaline junkies. They're clarity seekers. They've discovered that certain truths about who they are only emerge under pressure. The way diamonds form under weight. The way your real voice only comes out when you're singing at full volume. Remove the challenge, and you don't get peace. You get static. The white noise of a life happening to someone who feels like a guest in their own experience. The hardest part isn't the challenge itself. It's the aftermath. That strange hollow that opens up the moment you cross the finish line. The victory that tastes like nothing because your dopamine system was designed for the hunt, not the capture. You thought reaching the goal would feel like arrival, but it feels like amputation. And within hours, sometimes minutes, you're already restless again. Already guilty for not savoring it. Already searching. This is the part nobody tells you about being wired this way. The summits are always lonelier than the climbs, because the climb is where you meet yourself. The summit is just where you stand alone, looking for the next mountain. Wondering if something is wrong with you for not wanting to stay. Maybe nothing is wrong. Maybe you're just someone who understands that life isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a current you stay in. And staying in requires effort, intention, the constant choice to remain engaged rather than drift into the comfort of autopilot. Most people are terrified of this. They want to get somewhere and finally stop. But you know something they don't. Stopping doesn't feel like peace. It feels like death by 1,000 comfortable mornings. You're not afraid of challenge. You're afraid of irrelevance, of becoming soft in places that used to be sharp, of waking up one day and realizing you've been asleep for years, mistaking routine for living, mistaking the absence of pain for the presence of joy. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with this. Being surrounded by people who genuinely cannot understand why you won't just relax, who see your next goal as evidence of your dysfunction rather than your design. They mean well. They want you to be happy, and in their minds, happiness looks like Saturday mornings with nothing to do. But your happiness has a different shape. It's the exhaustion after a day that demanded everything, the satisfaction of capacity met with equal resistance. The feeling of being used up in service of something that mattered, even if only to you. You've tried explaining this, but the words never land right. So you've learned to just smile and nod when they worry about you, to keep your hunger private, to let them think you'll slow down eventually, knowing you never will. This isn't about achievement, let's be clear about that. You're not collecting trophies, you're not performing for an audience. Half the challenges you set for yourself, nobody even sees. You're doing this because it's the only way you know how to have a relationship with time that doesn't feel like betrayal. When you're challenged, you're present. When you're present, you're alive. And aliveness, for you, isn't a passive state. It's not something that happens to you while you're busy doing other things. It's something you generate through engagement, through resistance, through the meeting point between your capacity and something that tests it. Remove that friction, and you don't relax into peace. You dissolve into absence. So what do you do with this knowledge? How do you live in a world that keeps trying to slow you down for your own good? First, you stop apologizing. Stop framing your need for challenge as something to overcome. It's not a bug, it's your operating system. Second, you learn to choose your hard. Not all difficulty is created equal. Some challenges deplete you, others replenish you even as they exhaust you. Learn the difference. Seek the ones that make you more yourself, not less. Third, you find your people. They're rare, but they exist. The ones who don't ask why you can't just be happy with what you have. The ones who understand that for some people, having isn't the point. Becoming is. You learn to build in recovery without calling it rest. Because rest, for you, isn't the absence of challenge. It's the presence of a different kind. Reading that rewires your brain. Conversations that demand your full attention. Projects that engage different muscles than your primary challenges do. You don't need to do nothing. You need to do something that restores you even as it requires you. The worst thing you can do is force yourself into the kind of rest that works for other people. The Netflix marathon, the beach vacation where you're supposed to just lie there. That's not rest for you. That's torture. That's forcing a lion to graze. Honor your nature even in your downtime. And maybe, eventually, you make peace with the fact that you will always be slightly out of step with the cultural narrative about what a good life looks like. That your version of self-care looks like discipline, not indulgence. That your version of peace looks like full engagement, not withdrawal. That you will probably die with a project unfinished, a mountain half-climbed, a challenge mid-pursuit. And instead of seeing that as sad, you learn to see it as evidence, proof that you never stopped, never settled, never mistook the comfort of the known for the richness of the becoming. You remained in motion until the last possible moment. And if that's not a life well lived, what is? Not every stillness is death. But for you, aliveness has a pulse rate, and it's faster than most people's. And maybe needing challenge isn't a failure to find peace. Maybe it's a different kind of peace entirely. The peace of knowing you're using yourself fully. The peace of exhaustion that comes from expenditure, not depletion. The peace of a life that demanded everything you had to give and got it. That's not restlessness. That's integrity. The alignment between who you are and how you live. And if the world doesn't understand it, that's okay. You do. And in the end, that's the only understanding that matters. What part of you has the world always misread as inability to settle, when really it was a refusal to disappear? If this video gave you words for what you've always felt but couldn't name, subscribe. Here we talk about what the world never knew how to honor, but you always knew how to live. There's something nobody tells you about living this way. The guilt, the constant gnawing guilt that maybe you're ungrateful, that you have everything people dream of and still you're looking past it, through it, beyond it. You see their confusion when you mention the next thing, the next level, the next iteration of yourself you're trying to become. They hear dissatisfaction. You're trying to describe direction. They think you can't appreciate the present. You're trying to explain that appreciation, for you, looks like honoring your potential, not ignoring it. The guilt becomes another challenge in itself. Learning to want more without apologizing for it. Learning that expansion isn't the same as ingratitude. That you can be grateful for where you are and still know you're not done. These aren't contradictions, they're coordinates. The truth is, you've tried their way multiple times. You've attempted to be the person who wants less, who finds satisfaction in maintenance rather than growth, who can look at a stable life and feel complete. And every time something inside you started withering. Not loudly, quietly, like a plant in a room with almost enough light. You could survive there, but surviving isn't the point. You didn't come here to survive. You came here to burn through every ounce of capacity you were given, to test every edge, to find out what you're made of, not through theory but through trial. And the moment you accept this about yourself, the moment you stop trying to be someone else's version of healthy, something shifts. The guilt doesn't disappear entirely, but it stops running your life. You learn to carry it like weather, present but not determinative. What you're doing is living at the intersection of meaning and demand, where purpose meets the requirement to rise to meet it. Most people spend their lives trying to reduce demand, trying to make things easier, simpler, more manageable, and there's wisdom in that for them. But you've discovered something, that ease, for you, doesn't equal peace. It equals erosion. The slow wearing away of the parts of yourself that make you feel like yourself. Challenge isn't what depletes you, lack of challenge is. Because when there's nothing requiring your full capacity, you start to doubt you have any capacity at all. You need the mirror of difficulty to see your own reflection clearly. You need something pushing back to know you're still here, still solid, still capable of pushing forward. Here's what the world gets wrong. They think you're never satisfied. But satisfaction, for you, isn't a permanent state. It's a rhythm. The satisfaction comes in the moment of breakthrough, in the evidence of growth, in the surpassing of yesterday's version of yourself. It's the satisfaction of velocity, not destination, of becoming, not arrived. You're not moving because you're empty. You're moving because motion is how you fill yourself, how you know you're alive. The people who don't understand this will always see you as restless. But restlessness implies discomfort with where you are. What you have is something different, comfort with the journey itself, with the permanent state of transformation. You're not running from stillness. You're running toward yourself, the version that's always one challenge ahead, waiting to be met. And perhaps the most radical thing you can do is stop explaining yourself. Stop trying to make people understand why you need what you need. They won't. Not because they're incapable, but because their nervous systems are calibrated differently. They recharge in stillness. You recharge in engagement. They find peace in predictability. You find it in the dance with uncertainty. Neither is better. They're just different instruments playing different music. But you've spent so much energy trying to translate your song into their language, trying to justify your tempo, trying to make your intensity palatable. What if you just stopped? What if you let yourself be misunderstood by people who were never going to get it anyway, and instead put that energy into finding the few who speak your language fluently, who don't need you to explain why challenge feels like home, who just know? The loneliest part isn't the challenge itself, it's the space between challenges, that brief window after one ends and before the next begins, when you're forced to exist without the structure that gives your life shape, without the organizing principle that makes everything else make sense. Those hours feel endless. You try to rest, but you can't. You try to celebrate, but it feels hollow. You're waiting, always waiting for permission to start again, to want again, to reach again. And maybe that's the final challenge, learning to be with yourself in the in-between. Learning that you don't disappear when you're not actively becoming, that your worth isn't measured by your progress, that you can exist just for a moment without purpose driving you forward, not forever, just for a breath, just long enough to remember that the person doing all this becoming is already someone. Every challenge you've conquered lives in your body, in the way you stand, in the steadiness of your voice when you say, "I can do this," and actually mean it, in the quiet confidence that comes not from never falling, but from knowing you always get back up. You've built yourself through resistance. You're made of every hard thing you didn't run from, every mountain you climbed when people said you should be happy in the valley, every time you chose growth over comfort, expansion over safety, aliveness over ease. That's not restlessness, that's architecture. You've constructed yourself deliberately, through chosen difficulty, into someone who can hold more, do more, be more than seemed possible at the start. And the beautiful thing is you're still building, still reaching, still unfinished, still becoming. There's a certain kind of peace that only comes from being fully used, from going to bed knowing you gave everything you had to something that mattered, from waking up sore, not from injury, but from expenditure, from looking at your life and seeing evidence everywhere that you showed up, that you tried, that you refused to play small when you were built for magnitude. This is your peace. Not the absence of challenge, but the presence of purpose meeting capacity. Not the quiet of withdrawal, but the quiet that comes after a day of full engagement. When you finally stop explaining this to people who don't understand, when you finally accept that your wiring is different and stop apologizing for it, when you finally give yourself permission to need what you need, that's when you find it. Not rest, but rightness, the feeling of living in alignment with your own nature. And that, finally, is enough.